The dust billowed across the barren landscape like a phantom's breath as Lucille Reynolds clutched her tattered shawl closer to her trembling frame. The Arizona Territory of 1878 showed no mercy to those who wandered its unforgiving terrain, especially not to a woman alone with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of broken promises. Georgetown, a mining settlement nestled in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains, loomed ahead, its weathered buildings standing defiantly against the relentless desert wind. Lucille's boots, once fine leather but now cracked and worn, dragged through the dirt as she approached the town's edge. Her journey had begun 3 weeks prior in Tucson, after the death of her father and the subsequent revelation that his gambling debts had stripped them of everything. The coach had only taken her as far as the last outpost, 15 miles back. She'd walked the rest, surviving on the kindness of strangers and what little food she could forage. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Lucille felt her vision blur. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and her canteen had run dry that morning. Just a few more steps, she told herself, just a few more. But her body betrayed her, knees buckling beneath her skirts as she collapsed in a cloud of dust at the edge of town. "Whoa there, miss." A deep voice cut through the haze of her consciousness. Strong arms caught her before she fully hit the ground. "Easy now." Lucille blinked, trying to focus on the face before her. A man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sky gazed down at her with concern. His hat cast a shadow across features that seemed carved from the very mountains themselves: strong jawline, straight nose, and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. I'm fine," she whispered, attempting to stand on her own. "Just need water." "You need a whole lot more than that," the stranger said, supporting her weight effortlessly. "Name's Adam Lawson. I've got water and food at my place. Think you can make it a bit further?" Lucille wanted to protest, to insist she could fend for herself, but her body had other ideas. She managed a weak nod before her world tilted sideways, and darkness claimed her. When she awoke, Lucille found herself lying on a simple but clean bed in a sparsely furnished cabin. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and the aroma of something cooking made her stomach clench painfully with hunger. She tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed her back against the pillow. "Easy now, miss. You're suffering from heat exhaustion and likely haven't eaten properly in days." It was the man from before Adam Lawson. "Where am I?" Lucille's voice came out as a rasp. "My place, just outside Georgetown proper. I'm the local rancher." Adam handed her a cup of water. "Drink slowly." Lucille obeyed, savoring each sip as it soothed her parched throat. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson, but I cannot impose. Once I've rested, I'll be on my way." Adam's expression remained stoic as he moved to a small stove in the corner of the single room. "And where might that way be, miss?" "Reynolds, Lucille Reynolds." She hesitated, realizing she had no answer to his question. I'm not entirely certain yet." Adam returned with a bowl of stew that smelled heavenly. "Well, Miss Reynolds, seems to me you don't have much of a plan. Georgetown isn't exactly brimming with opportunities for a lady on her own." Lucille accepted the stew with trembling hands. "I'll manage, I always do." Meaning no disrespect, but you weren't managing too well face down in the dirt. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. She flushed with embarrassment but couldn't deny the truth of his words. "My circumstances are temporary." Adam pulled up a chair beside the bed. "I've got a proposition for you, Miss Reynolds. My ranch needs help. The housekeeper position's been vacant since Mrs. Tanner passed last winter. Room and board provided plus a small wage." Lucille narrowed her eyes, suspicious of charity disguised as employment. "I don't need pity, Mr. Lawson." "Good, because I'm not offering any. What I need is someone who can cook, clean, and keep things in order while I tend to the cattle. What you need is a roof and honest work." He stood, his tall frame nearly touching the low ceiling. "Think about it. I've got business in town. Rest up, finish that stew. I'll be back before sundown." Before Lucille could respond, Adam had donned his hat and was out the door, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a bowl of the most delicious stew she'd tasted in months. By the time Adam returned, Lucille had made her decision. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with winter approaching and her prospects non-existent. When he entered, she was sitting upright, her hair combed and her resolve strengthened. "I'll accept your offer, Mr. Lawson, on one condition." She met his gaze directly. "This is a business arrangement only. I'll work hard and earn my keep, but don't mistake my situation for weakness." Adam hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Reynolds. And call me Adam. Mr. Lawson was my father, and he's been gone these 5 years now." "Then you must call me Lucille." She offered her hand, which he shook with a firm but gentle grip. "Well, Lucille, welcome to the Broken Spur Ranch. It ain't much, but it's home." The next morning, Adam showed Lucille around the property, a modest but well-maintained ranch house, a barn housing several horses, a chicken coop, and a small vegetable garden that had seen better days. The main herd of cattle grazed on the surrounding grasslands, tended by 2 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn. "This is Miguel and Charlie," Adam introduced the men, who tipped their hats respectfully. "They help with the cattle. Miguel's the best tracker this side of the Rio Grande, and Charlie can break any horse that stands on 4 legs. Miss," they both murmured, curious but polite, "Miss Reynolds is our new housekeeper," Adam explained, his tone leaving no room for questions. "She'll be staying in the main house." Lucille felt their appraising gazes but stood tall. She was used to judgment. It had followed her all her life as the daughter of a notorious gambler. The days quickly fell into a rhythm. Lucille rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Adam and the hands, then spent her mornings cleaning, mending, and tending to the garden, which she was determined to restore. Afternoons were for baking bread and preparing the evening meal. It was hard work but honest, and for the first time in years, Lucille felt a sense of purpose. Adam was often gone from sunrise to sunset, working the herd or handling business in town. When he was around, their interactions were cordial but limited. He was a man of few words, preferring action to conversation, and Lucille respected that, having had her fill of smooth-talking men with her father's associates. 2 weeks into her stay, disaster struck. A torrential rainstorm swept through the territory, unusual for the season. The creek that bordered the Broken Spur overflowed its banks, flooding the lower pasture where the cattle grazed. Adam, Miguel, and Charlie worked through the night to move the herd to higher ground, but by morning, exhaustion had taken its toll. Lucille watched anxiously from the porch as the 3 men returned, soaked and mud-covered. Adam dismounted stiffly, his movements betraying pain he was trying to hide. "You're hurt," she said, stepping forward to help him up the porch steps. "It's nothing." He waved her off, but she saw him wince as he removed his rain-slicked coat. "Adam Lawson, you sit down this instant and let me see." Her tone brooked no argument, and to her surprise, he complied, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. Lucille carefully helped him remove his shirt, revealing a deep gash across his right shoulder blade. "This needs stitching. How did it happen?" "Branch came down when I was herding strays near the creek." Adam's voice was tight with pain. "Caught me off guard." Lucille set water to boil and gathered clean rags. "I'll need to clean it first. This will hurt." Adam nodded grimly. "Wouldn't be the first time." As Lucille worked, cleaning the wound and preparing to stitch it closed, she couldn't help but notice the map of scars that crisscrossed his back and torso, testament to a life lived hard on the frontier. She wondered about the stories behind each one but kept her questions to herself. "You've done this before," Adam observed as she threaded a needle. "My father's gambling often led to altercations. I became quite proficient at patching him up." Lucille kept her voice neutral, though the memories were painful. "Hold still now." Adam remained silent and motionless as she stitched the wound closed, his only reaction an occasional tightening of his jaw. When she finished, she applied a salve made from herbs she'd found in the garden and bandaged his shoulder. "You should rest," she advised, cleaning up the bloodied water and rags. "The cattle are safe and Miguel and Charlie can handle things for a day. Can't afford to rest, there's too much to do." Adam attempted to stand but swayed slightly, betraying his exhaustion. Lucille placed a firm hand on his good shoulder. "You're no use to this ranch dead on your feet. Rest today and you'll work better tomorrow." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills, and for a moment Lucille thought he would brush her off. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. Wake me at noon, he conceded, making his way toward his bedroom at the back of the house. At the doorway, he paused. Thank you, Lucille. It was the first time he'd used her name without the formality of Miss Reynolds, and something in the way he said it made her heart skip a beat. You're welcome, Adam, she replied softly, but he had already disappeared into his room. That evening, after checking that Adam was resting comfortably, Lucille sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The rain had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed landscape that smelled of sage and wet earth. For the first time since arriving at the Broken Spur, she allowed herself to feel something beyond mere gratitude for shelter and employment. There was a peace here she'd never known in the chaotic life she'd led with her father. Despite the hard work and the isolation, she felt safer than she had in years. But with that realization came guilt. What right did she have to this temporary haven when it was built on charity she hadn't earned? Penny for your thoughts? Adam's deep voice startled her from her reverie. He stood in the doorway, looking pale but steadier than before, his right arm held carefully against his body to protect his injured shoulder. You should be resting, Lucille chided gently, but she made room for him on the bench beside her. Been resting all day, any more and I'll take root. He lowered himself carefully onto the bench. You've been good for this place. The unexpected compliment warmed Lucille more than it should have. I've done nothing special. Beg to differ. Garden's coming back to life. House hasn't been this clean or smelled this good since my mother was alive. Even Charlie and Miguel are fighting less. Now they've got decent meals to look forward to. Lucille smiled despite herself. High praise from a man of so few words. I say what needs saying. Adam looked out at the darkening landscape. Tomorrow I'm heading to Tucson, ranch business, should be back in 3 days. I'll keep things running smoothly here, Lucille promised, though the thought of being alone on the ranch, even with Miguel and Charlie nearby, made her uneasy. Adam seemed to read her thoughts. Miguel's wife, Elena, will stay in the bunkhouse while I'm gone. She's a good woman, handy with a rifle if need be. Relief washed over Lucille. Thank you for the consideration. They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the indigo sky. Something had shifted between them, a small but significant change that neither acknowledged aloud. Adam departed at dawn, leaving Lucille with a list of tasks and a promise to return as soon as possible. The 3 days stretched into 5 due to unexpected complications with the cattle sale, and when he finally returned, the relief that flooded through Lucille at the sight of him riding up the path surprised her with its intensity. Elena had been good company, teaching Lucille Spanish phrases and sharing recipes passed down through generations. But the ranch had felt different without Adam's steady presence, as if missing its anchor. Welcome back, Lucille called from the porch where she was shelling peas. There's stew keeping warm on the stove. Adam dismounted, his movements betraying exhaustion. Smells like heaven. He led his horse to the barn, returning minutes later with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Brought you something. Surprised, Lucille set aside her work and accepted the package. Inside was a beautiful blue fabric cotton, but of a finer quality than anything she'd had since leaving Tucson. Adam, this is too much. Noticed your dress is wearing thin at the elbows. He shrugged, seemingly embarrassed by his own thoughtfulness. Figured you could use something new for Sundays. The simple gesture touched Lucille deeply. It wasn't just the material itself, but the fact that he had noticed, had thought of her needs while away on business. Thank you. I'll start sewing it tomorrow. Adam nodded, satisfied, and headed inside for his meal, leaving Lucille to ponder this new side of her employer. As autumn deepened into winter, life at the Broken Spur settled into a comfortable routine. Adam's wound healed well, leaving only a thin scar to join the collection on his body. Lucille had sewn herself a new dress from the blue fabric, wearing it proudly to the small church in Georgetown on Sundays, where she sat beside Adam in the hard wooden pew. The townsfolk were curious about their arrangement, of course. A single man and woman living under the same roof, regardless of her position as housekeeper, was bound to raise eyebrows. But Adam's standing in the community and his no-nonsense demeanor silenced most gossip before it could take root. One Sunday in December after church service, Lucille was approached by Mrs. Holbrook, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of Georgetown's moral standards. "Miss Reynolds, a word if you please, Mrs." Holbrook drew Lucille aside, her pinched face conveying disapproval before she even spoke. "I feel it's my Christian duty to express concern about your living situation." Lucille stiffened, though she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not sure I understand your meaning, Mrs. Holbrook." "A young, unmarried woman living alone with Mr. Lawson. It invites speculation." The older woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's talk, my dear. Not that I believe it, of course, but others might question your virtue." Heat flooded Lucille's cheeks, anger rather than embarrassment. "My arrangement with Mr. Lawson is strictly professional. He's been a perfect gentleman." Of course, Mrs. Holbrook patted her arm condescendingly, "but appearances matter in a small town. Perhaps you might consider alternative employment." Mrs. Garrett at the hotel mentioned needing help with laundry. Before Lucille could respond, Adam appeared at her side, his expression thunderous. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said curtly, touching the brim of his hat in the barest acknowledgement of courtesy. "If you're done trying to poach my housekeeper, we'll be on our way." He offered his arm to Lucille, who took it gratefully, and they left the churchyard without another word. Only when they were in the wagon heading home did Lucille release the breath she'd been holding. "I'm causing you problems in town," she said quietly. "Perhaps Mrs. Holbrook has a point about appearances." Adam's hands tightened on the reins. "Mrs. Holbrook needs to mind her own business." "You've done nothing wrong. But people are talking, people always talk, doesn't make it worth listening to." He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Unless you're uncomfortable at the ranch." "No," the vehemence in her voice surprised them both. "No," she repeated more calmly. "The Broken Spur feels more like home than anywhere I've lived before." Something flickered across Adam's face, relief, perhaps, or something deeper. "Then it's settled. You stay as long as you want." The matter seemed resolved, but that night Lucille lay awake, Mrs. Holbrook's insinuations echoing in her mind. What troubled her most wasn't the gossip itself, but her own feelings that had been growing steadily since she arrived. Adam was no longer just her employer, but someone whose presence she'd come to rely on, whose rare smiles she cherished, whose approval mattered more than it should. These feelings complicated everything. If she acknowledged them, even to herself, wouldn't that prove Mrs. Holbrook right? And what if Adam discovered her true feelings? He might feel obligated to ask her to leave, destroying the sanctuary she'd found at the Broken Spur. Morning brought no clarity, but it did bring work, which Lucille threw herself into with renewed vigor. If hard labor could exhaust her body enough that her mind had no energy for troublesome thoughts, all the better. December brought bitter cold to the Arizona territory, unusual but not unheard of. Adam spent long days ensuring the cattle had access to water and feed, often returning after dark with frost clinging to his beard. Lucille kept the stove burning and soup ready, waiting up no matter how late he returned. On the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, Adam surprised Lucille by returning mid-afternoon with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "Christmas is coming," he explained gruffly when she questioned him. "Thought the house could use some cheer." Together they set up the tree in the corner of the main room, decorating it with pine cones, dried berries, and small carved wooden ornaments that Adam produced from a box stored in the attic. "These were my mother's," he said, handling each one with care. "She loved Christmas. Made it special even out here where there wasn't much." Lucille watched him, sensing the rare opportunity to learn more about the private man. "Tell me about her." Adam's expression softened as he hung a wooden star on a branch. "She was strong. Had to be to follow my father out here from Boston when this was all still wild territory. But she was gentle too. Could tame anything with a kind word. Wild horses, angry men, scared children." He smiled at a memory. "She taught school in Georgetown until she got too sick to make the ride. Consumption took her when I was 16. "I'm sorry," Lucille said softly. "My mother died when I was young too. I barely remember her." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Makes you grow up fast, doesn't it?" They finished decorating in companionable silence, and when they stepped back to admire their work, Lucille felt a surge of emotion. The simple tree, adorned with memories and illuminated by a single candle, represented everything she'd never had: stability, tradition, a sense of belonging. "It's perfect," she whispered. Adam stood close beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "Yes," he agreed, but when Lucille glanced up, she found him looking not at the tree but at her. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken words, until Miguel's arrival with news of a broken fence line shattered the spell. Adam excused himself to handle the problem, and Lucille was left alone with the Christmas tree and her increasingly complicated feelings. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the landscape transformed by a rare dusting of snow that had fallen in the night. Lucille rose early to prepare a special breakfast and was surprised to find Adam already awake, adding wood to the stove. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her, more warmth in his voice than she'd ever heard before. "Merry Christmas," she returned, suddenly shy. "I have something for you." She retrieved a package from her room, wrapped in plain paper and tied with string. Adam accepted it with raised eyebrows. "Didn't expect a gift. It's not much," Lucille hastened to add, watching as he untied the string. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. She'd worked on it secretly in the evenings after he'd gone to bed, unraveling and restarting several times until it met her exacting standards. "This is fine work," Adam said, running his fingers over the even stitches. "Thank you, Lucille." He wrapped it around his neck, the blue a striking contrast to his tanned skin. "Now I'm embarrassed my gift isn't nearly as practical. You got me a gift," Lucille couldn't hide her surprise. Adam disappeared into his room, returning with a small wooden box. "Made it myself. Not as skilled as my father was with woodworking, but—" Lucille opened the box to find a delicate wooden hair comb carved with intertwining flowers and leaves. "Adam, it's beautiful. Noticed you're always pushing your hair back when you work." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable with the sentimentality of the moment. "Thought it might help." "It's perfect," Lucille said, meaning it. She immediately tucked it into her hair, securing the troublesome strands that always escaped her bun. "How does it look?" "Beautiful," Adam said, then cleared his throat. "The comb looks good, fits well." Lucille busied herself with breakfast preparations to hide her blush, but the warmth that had bloomed in her chest at his words remained throughout the day. They shared a festive meal with Miguel, his wife Alina, and Charlie, exchanging stories and small gifts. It was simple but more meaningful than any Christmas Lucille had experienced before. As winter gave way to spring, life at the Broken Spur grew busier. Calving season brought sleepless nights as Adam, Miguel, and Charlie took turns watching the herd. Lucille often found herself helping with newborn calves brought to the barn for extra care, learning to bottle feed the orphans and treat minor ailments under Adam's patient instruction. Their relationship had evolved into a partnership of sorts, each respecting the other's skills and judgment. Adam increasingly sought Lucille's opinion on ranch matters, from which seeds to plant in the expanding garden to whether they should invest in new breeding stock. But beneath the surface of their easy companionship ran an undercurrent of tension, unacknowledged feelings that manifested in lingering glances, accidental touches that lasted a moment too long, conversations that trailed into comfortable silence broken only when duty called. One evening in early April, as Lucille was returning from collecting eggs, she spotted a rider approaching the ranch at a gallop. The figure was too small to be Adam or one of the hands, and alarm shot through her until she recognized Alina's distinctive red shawl. "Lucille." Alina called, reining her horse to a stop in a cloud of dust. "Come quick, it's Adam, there's been an accident." Lucille's heart lurched painfully in her chest. "What happened? Where is he?" "The new bull broke through the fence," Alina explained as Lucille climbed onto the horse behind her. Adam pushed Charlie out of the way but couldn't get clear himself. "They've taken him to Doc Watson's in town." The ride to Georgetown was a blur of fear and silent prayers. When they arrived at the doctor's small office, Charlie was pacing outside, his hat twisted nervously in his hands. "How is he?" Lucille demanded, dismounting before Alina had fully stopped the horse. Charlie's face was grim. Doc's with him now. Bull caught him in the ribs and tossed him against the fence post. He was conscious when we brought him in, but in bad shape. Lucille pushed past him into the doctor's office, her composure crumbling at the sight of Adam lying pale and still on the examination table, his shirt cut away to reveal a massive bruise spreading across his torso. Doc Watson, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands, was binding Adam's ribs with long strips of cloth. "Miss Reynolds," the doctor acknowledged her without pausing in his work. "Multiple broken ribs and a nasty concussion, but he's stable, no internal bleeding that I can detect." Relief made Lucille's knees weak. "He'll recover, with proper rest and care, yes, but he'll need watching for the next few days. Concussions can be tricky things." Adam's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their voices, glazed with pain but alert enough to recognize Lucille. "The bull?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Back in the pen," Charlie answered from the doorway. "Miguel's reinforcing the fence now. Good." Adam attempted to sit up but fell back with a groan of pain. "Don't move, you stubborn man," Lucille chided, moving to his side and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You need to lie still. Ranch needs tending," Adam protested weakly. "And it will be tended," Lucille assured him. "Charlie and Miguel know what needs doing, and I can manage the rest." Doc Watson finished his bandaging and administered a dose of laudanum for the pain. "He needs complete bed rest for at least a week," he instructed Lucille. "After that, light duties only for another 3 weeks. Those ribs won't heal properly if he's back to wrangling cattle too soon." "He'll rest if I have to tie him to the bed," Lucille promised, earning a weak chuckle from Adam that quickly transformed into a wince of pain. Getting Adam back to the ranch was a challenge that required Doc Watson's wagon and both Charlie and Miguel's assistance. By the time they had him settled in his bed, night had fallen, and Adam was drifting in and out of consciousness due to the laudanum and exhaustion. Lucille sat beside his bed, a basin of cool water and cloths ready to soothe the fever that Doc Watson had warned might come. The ranch hands had returned to their duties after extracting a promise from Lucille to call if Adam's condition worsened. In the quiet of the night, with only the soft sound of Adam's breathing and the occasional distant lowing of cattle, Lucille allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of her fear when she'd thought she might lose him. It wasn't just concern for an employer or even a friend, it was the terrifying realization that somewhere along the way, Adam Lawson had become essential to her happiness. She reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear. "I couldn't bear it." True to Doc Watson's prediction, fever set in during the early hours of morning. Lucille spent the night battling it with cool cloths and whispered encouragements, praying for the break that would signal Adam's turning point. By dawn, her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her vigilance was rewarded when Adam's temperature finally began to fall. The next few days established a new routine. Charlie and Miguel handled the ranch operations, checking in morning and evening for instructions and to report progress. Lucille divided her time between her usual household duties and caring for Adam, who proved to be an impatient patient despite his weakness. "I should be out there," he grumbled on the third day, watching through the window as Charlie led a string of horses to the corral for training. "You should be grateful you're alive," Lucille countered, placing a tray with broth and bread on his lap. "Another few inches and that bull would have gored you through the heart." Adam's expression softened at the tremor in her voice. "I'm tougher than I look." "You're still just a man, Adam Lawson, flesh and blood, not iron and stone." Lucille busied herself straightening the already neat bed covers. "Now eat your broth before it gets cold." He complied, watching her with a thoughtful expression that made her self-conscious. "What would you have done?" he asked after finishing half the bowl. "If things had gone differently, if I hadn't made it." Lucille stilled, the question cutting too close to the fears that had haunted her sleepless nights. "That's a morbid conversation. Practical one," Adam insisted. "Ranch would be yours, you know." "Left it to you and my will after Christmas." Shocked, Lucille stared at him. "You did what?" "Adam, that's not right. You have family somewhere, surely none that care about this place like you do." His gaze was steady, challenging her to deny it. "None that care about me like you do either." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning beyond their simple truth. Lucille felt exposed, as if Adam had seen straight through the careful barriers she'd constructed around her heart. "You're delirious," she managed finally, taking the half-empty bowl from his hands. "Rest now. We can discuss your questionable estate planning when you're fully recovered." Adam caught her wrist as she turned to leave, his grip gentle but insistent. "Lucille," just her name, but the way he said it demanded her full attention. "I'm not delirious and I'm not wrong." She couldn't meet his eyes, afraid of what he might see in hers. "We'll talk later," she promised, gently extracting her wrist from his grasp. Later never came. As Adam's condition improved, allowing him to move from bed to chair and eventually to take short walks around the ranch yard, they fell back into their comfortable patterns of conversation, carefully avoiding the moment of vulnerability that had passed between them. Spring advanced, bringing new growth to the land and increasing demands on everyone's time. Adam chafed against his restricted duties, though he grudgingly followed Doc Watson's orders not to exert himself. Lucille found herself taking on more responsibility with the ranch accounts and business correspondence, discovering an aptitude for figures that surprised both of them. "You should have been a schoolteacher," Adam remarked one evening as they reviewed the ledgers together. "Or a banker's wife." Lucille laughed, though there was a hint of bitterness in it. "Neither was likely with my father's reputation. Besides, I never had the formal education for teaching." "You're educated enough," Adam insisted. "Read better than half the men in Georgetown, write a finer hand than I ever could." "My mother's influence," Lucille explained. "She taught me to read before she died. After that, I stole books whenever I could from hotel rooms from my father's associates, learned from whatever I could get my hands on." Adam leaned back in his chair, studying her with newfound admiration. "You're a remarkable woman, Lucille Reynolds." The compliment warmed her, but it also awakened the uncertainty that had been growing in her heart. What was she doing here, playing at being a rancher's wife without the commitment or security of actually being one? Adam might appreciate her, might even care for her in his way, but he'd never indicated any desire to change their arrangement. And why would he? He had the benefits of her cooking, cleaning, and now her business assistance without the complications of courtship or marriage. It was a practical solution for them both. Yet as the days lengthened and summer approached, Lucille found herself increasingly restless. The contentment she'd found at the Broken Spur now felt incomplete, tinged with longing for something she had no right to expect. The turning point came unexpectedly during a trip to Georgetown for supplies. Lucille had gone alone, as Adam was meeting with a cattle buyer from Tucson at the ranch. She'd completed her purchases and was loading them into the wagon when Mrs. Holbrook appeared, a predatory gleam in her eye. "Miss Reynolds, what fortunate timing," the banker's wife exclaimed with false warmth. "I was just telling Reverend Simmons about your situation." Lucille glanced at the minister, a kind-faced man who always greeted her warmly at Sunday services. "My situation. Living alone with Mr. Lawson all these months," Mrs. Holbrook clarified, as if speaking to a child. "The Reverend agrees it's most inappropriate." Reverend Simmons looked uncomfortable. "I merely suggested that appearances matter in a small community, Miss Reynolds. Though I'm sure your arrangement is entirely proper." "It is," Lucille confirmed stiffly. "Mr. Lawson has been a perfect gentleman." Mrs. Holbrook sniffed disapprovingly. "Nevertheless, my dear, a woman's reputation is a fragile thing. Once lost, it can never truly be recovered." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "There's talk that Mr. Lawson might be courting the widow Barnes from Benson, a respectable match given her family connections." The news, whether true or malicious gossip, struck Lucille like a physical blow. She'd never considered that Adam might be seeking a wife elsewhere, though it made perfect sense. A widow would bring experience and possibly property to the match, whereas Lucille had nothing to offer but her labor and compromised reputation. "I wish Mr. Lawson every happiness," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to return to the ranch." The ride back to the Broken Spur seemed endless, each familiar landmark mocking her with memories of contentment that now felt like self-deception. By the time she arrived, Lucille had made her decision. It was time to move on before her heart was irreparably broken. She found Adam in the barn examining a new saddle he'd ordered from the tanner in Tucson. He looked up with a smile that faltered when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting aside the saddle and moving toward her. Lucille squared her shoulders, determined to maintain her dignity. "I think it's time I moved on, Mr. Lawson." The formal address wasn't lost on Adam, whose brow furrowed in confusion. "Moved on? What are you talking about, Lucille?" "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," she continued, the speech she'd rehearsed on the ride home sounding hollow to her own ears. "You've been more than generous, but I need to make my own way now. This is about Mrs. Holbrook, isn't it?" Adam's voice hardened with anger. "What did that meddling woman say to you?" Surprised that he'd guessed so accurately, Lucille faltered momentarily. "It's not just Mrs. Holbrook, it's everything. I came here with nothing, desperate and alone. You gave me a chance when no one else would, and I'll always be grateful. But I can't stay here forever, living on your charity." "Charity?" Adam looked genuinely bewildered. "Is that what you think this is? Lucille, you've earned your place here 10 times over. The ranch has never run better than since you arrived." "That's kind of you to say, but we both know I'm a burden." The words escaped before she could stop them, revealing more of her insecurity than she'd intended. "Your life would be simpler without having to worry about my reputation or mine about yours." "A burden," Adam repeated slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder to read. "Is that how you see yourself? As a weight I'm carrying?" Lucille dropped her gaze, unable to bear the intensity in his eyes. "It's the truth, isn't it? You took me in out of kindness when I was half dead at your doorstep. You've given me everything and asked for nothing in return except work that any hired hand could do." Adam stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Look at me, Lucille." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet his. "If you're a burden," he said softly, his voice rougher than usual, "then let me carry you until you're not." The echo of her own thoughts took Lucille's breath away. "What? Let me carry you," Adam repeated, reaching out to take her hand. "Not because you're weak, but because sometimes the journey's easier when you're not walking it alone." His calloused fingers curled around hers. "I'm not good with words, Lucille, never have been, but I hoped you knew how I felt, how you feel." Lucille whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Like I've been half alive all these years, just existing. Then you showed up, stubborn and proud even when you were dying of thirst, and suddenly the world had color again." Adam's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I've been afraid to speak, afraid you'd leave if you knew, but if you're leaving anyway." He stepped even closer, bringing his free hand up to cup her cheek. "I love you, Lucille Reynolds, have almost since the beginning. Stay with me, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife, if you'll have me." Joy surged through Lucille, so intense it was almost pain. "The Widow Barnes, what?" Adam looked genuinely confused. "Mrs. Holbrook said you were courting the Widow Barnes from Benson." Adam's laugh was sudden and genuine. "Martha Barnes is 60 years old and happily remarried to a shopkeeper in Benson. I bought cattle from her late husband's estate last year." His expression sobered. "There's only one woman I want, Lucille. It's always been you." "Oh," Lucille breathed, feeling foolish and wonderfully, gloriously happy all at once. "In that case, yes, I'll stay, yes, I'll be your wife." Adam's smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual seriousness and making him look years younger. "Yes." "Yes," Lucille confirmed, laughing through sudden tears. He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that deepened when she responded eagerly, wrapping her arms around his neck to pull him closer. It was a kiss worth waiting for, worth all the lonely years and hardships that had led her to this moment. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning like fools, Adam pressed his forehead to hers. "Should we tell Miguel and Charlie or let them figure it out on their own?" "Let's tell them," Lucille decided, thinking of the two men who had become like family to her. "And then let's ride into Georgetown and tell Mrs. Holbrook personally." Adam's laugh echoed through the barn, startling the horses. "That's my Lucille, always practical." "Your Lucille," she repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." They were married 2 weeks later in the little church in Georgetown, with Reverend Simmons officiating and the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Holbrook sat in the front pew, her sour expression at odds with the joyous occasion. Miguel served as best man while Alina stood beside Lucille, beaming with approval. Lucille wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that Adam had ordered specially from Tucson, with the wooden hair comb he'd carved for Christmas securing her veil. When she walked down the aisle toward him, his expression of wonder and love nearly brought her to tears. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. When Reverend Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, Adam's kiss was restrained by the public setting but conveyed a promise of things to come that made Lucille blush. The celebration afterward at the Broken Spur lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than even Charlie could consume. As the guests began to depart, Adam found Lucille sitting on the porch steps, taking a moment of quiet to absorb the magnitude of the day. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, settling beside her. The new name sent a thrill through her. "More than I ever thought possible." Adam took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he'd placed there hours before. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "You were never a burden." Not for a single day. Lucille leaned her head against his shoulder, the solid strength of him a comfort and a promise. "I know that now, but I'm glad you said it anyway that day in the barn." "Said what?" "Let me carry you until you're not." She smiled at the memory. "It was the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." Adam chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "Not a high bar, considering your past." "True," Lucille admitted, "but I wouldn't change a thing about how we came to be here." She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Every step, every hardship led me to you. How could I regret any of it?" Adam's expression softened, the love in his eyes unmistakable in the light spilling from the house windows. "Come inside, wife," he said, rising and pulling her gently to her feet. "The day's not over yet." That night, in the privacy of what was now their shared bedroom, Adam showed Lucille with tender touches and whispered endearments just how much he treasured her. Their coming together was both an ending and a beginning, the culmination of months of unspoken longing, and the first step in their new life together. Afterward, lying in the circle of Adam's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Lucille felt a sense of belonging she'd never known before. This was home. Not the ranch buildings or the land itself, but this man who had seen her at her lowest and still found her worthy of love. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Adam's voice rumbled beneath her ear. Lucille propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, marveling at the right to do so. "About how far I've come, from collapsing at your feet to sharing your bed. It's quite a journey." Adam's hand traced the curve of her bare shoulder. "And it's just beginning. Promise, promise." He sealed it with a kiss that led to other, more wordless affirmations of their commitment to each other. Spring gave way to summer, and Lucille settled into her role as Adam's wife with a joy that only deepened as the days passed. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Adam handling the cattle and Lucille overseeing the finances and household. They expanded the garden, added a new wing to the house, and hired 2 more hands to manage the growing herd. Georgetown took note of the changes at the Broken Spur, and even Mrs. Holbrook was forced to admit that the marriage appeared to be a success, though she did so with pursed lips and obvious disappointment at being proven wrong. By the following spring, Lucille had news that brought Adam to his knees when she told him they were expecting a child in the fall. His reaction, a mixture of terror and ecstatic joy, confirmed what she already knew, that he would be as wonderful a father as he was a husband. "A baby," he kept repeating, his hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. Our baby, Lucille agreed, covering his hand with hers. "I hope he has your eyes," Adam corrected with a grin, "and I hope she has your spirit, your strength." When autumn came, bringing with it golden light and cooler temperatures, it also brought the birth of their daughter. After a long labor that left Adam pacing anxiously outside their bedroom while Alina and the midwife attended Lucille, little Sarah Elizabeth Lawson made her entrance into the world with a lusty cry that immediately won her father's heart. "She's perfect," Adam whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with more care than he'd ever shown the most delicate china. Look what we made, Lucille. Exhausted but radiant, Lucille watched the man she loved hold their child for the first time. She is perfect, she agreed. And so are you, Adam Lawson. He looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. I don't deserve this happiness. You do, Lucille insisted. We both do. After everything, we deserve this joy. As Sarah grew from infant to toddler to a spirited young girl with her father's stormy eyes and her mother's determination, the broken spur flourished alongside her. Adam and Lucille added to their family 2 years later with twin boys, Andrew and Alexander, who quickly proved to be as adventurous as their sister was thoughtful. Life was not without challenges, drought years that threatened the herd, a fire that nearly claimed the barn, illnesses and accidents that were inevitable in ranch life. But through it all, Adam and Lucille faced each obstacle together, their partnership only strengthening with each test. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Adam surprised Lucille with a special gift, the deed to a small building in Georgetown that had once been a millinery shop but had stood empty for years. I don't understand, Lucille said, turning the paper over in her hands. What's this for? Your school, Adam explained, watching her reaction carefully. Georgetown's growing, new families arriving every month, children need proper education, and you, my love, need something that's entirely yours. Lucille stared at him, speechless with surprise and emotion. A school. Adam, I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than anyone else for 50 miles, he interrupted gently. You've been teaching our children and half the ranch hands kids already. This just makes it official. Tears filled Lucille's eyes as the full implication of his gift sank in. It wasn't just a building or a job, it was Adam's acknowledgement of her dreams, dreams she'd barely admitted even to herself. You knew, she whispered. How did you know? Adam's smile was tender as he wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I know you, Lucille Lawson. Better than anyone. I've watched you with our children, seen how you light up when you're teaching them something new. He took her hands in his. The ranch will always be our foundation, but this is something just for you. Overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the love behind it, Lucille threw her arms around his neck. Thank you, she murmured against his skin, for seeing me, for always seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself. The Georgetown school opened that fall with 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Lucille thrived in her new role, bringing the same dedication to teaching that she'd brought to every aspect of her life at the Broken Spur. Adam managed the ranch with the help of their growing children, who took to the work with varying degrees of enthusiasm but united pride in their heritage. As the years passed, the legend of Adam and Lucille Lawson grew in Georgetown and beyond. How he'd found her half dead at the edge of town, how she'd saved the ranch with her business acumen, how their love had transformed not just their own lives but the entire community. Young couples sought their advice, new settlers looked to them for inspiration, and their children carried their legacy forward with the strength and compassion they'd inherited from both parents. On quiet evenings, when the day's work was done, and they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and purple, Adam would sometimes take Lucille's hand, now marked with the signs of years of hard work and the raising of children, and bring it to his lips in a gesture unchanged from their courting days. Still happy, Mrs. Lawson? He would ask, the corners of his eyes crinkling with the smile that had become so much more frequent over the years. And Lucille, looking at the life they'd built together, the thriving ranch, the successful school, their grown children making their own way in the world, would squeeze his hand and answer with the simple truth that had sustained them through every trial and triumph. More than I ever dreamed possible. For in the end, what had begun as charity, a desperate woman and a lonely man finding temporary solace in each other's company, had blossomed into something far greater. A love strong enough to weather any storm, deep enough to heal old wounds, and enduring enough to build a legacy that would last long after they were gone. What Lucille had once seen as her greatest weakness, being a burden to the man who'd saved her life, had instead become the foundation of their shared strength. And Adam, in choosing to carry her until she could stand on her own, had found himself equally supported by the woman who'd come to embody the heart of everything he valued. Together, they had transformed the Broken Spur into more than just a successful cattle operation. They had made it a home, a haven, a place where broken things could be mended and new dreams could take root and flourish under the vast Arizona sky. Their story, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations, became part of the very fabric of the West itself, a testament to the power of love to change not just two lives, but an entire world.